everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we're going to glaze some yarn. But we're going to do this specifically in a comparison of the same yarn base, but in two different forms. One that's going to have a little bit more resist than the other. Today we're going to dye some Hawthorne fingering weight yarn and a Hawthorne sock blank. All of this is 80% superwash fine Highland wool, 20% polyamide. I am only going to do a glaze on our yarn today. I'm not going to dye it a base layer and then over dye it because I really want to see exactly how much resist we truly get from the glaze versus the glaze plus the combination of whatever color we dye on it first. And therefore that's exactly what we're going to do right now. A sock blank is a knit piece of fabric, and this particular blank was knit with 2 strands of yarn held together. And so the reason why things may be a little bit different is that there's going to be some resist from the way the stitches are in here, especially when the yarn is wet. Like even dry, if I pull on the blank, you can see that there is space between those stitches. And so when wet, that might add a little more tension, especially if the blank is moved. And the dye, when it's striking as fast as we want it to do with a glaze, isn't going to be able to get in between the stitches, giving us some beautiful reverse speckling. And so a very big difference between the blank and the yarn. Before we jump in to glazing our yarn today, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Cindy. Cindy, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. What is glazing yarn anyway? Glazing yarn is when you want to have a really shallow application of your color on the yarn, where you feel almost like it was airbrushed and you can really see some of that original color underneath. And so even though we'll be applying, I haven't decided yet if we'll do a navy or a purple, we'll apply that all over the yarn, we'll still have some feel of the fact that there was a white or a pastel color there to start with. And the key to doing this is to use a situation with really high acid, so that way as soon as the dye comes into contact with the yarn, it'll stick right there on the outside before sort of penetrating into the fibers more. I want to pre-soak all of our yarn in plain tap water for about an hour. I could add some acid to the pre-soak. That certainly can help with the glazing process, but since we're gonna have enough acid in our dye bath, I don't think it's really that necessary. So I just added everything to our water and we're gonna let it sit. In my 2 dye pots, I have 24 cups of water in each, and I'm gonna add approximately 300 milliliters of white vinegar into each one. Now, another thing that could be interesting to do at some point would be to glaze yarn and a blank in the same pot, but I don't think, because one concern is because there's less surface area on the blank, the color could overall be darker. And so there's like a lot of back and forth that I can do in my brain. We're not gonna worry about this. We're gonna go for it. For our glaze today, we're going to use a 1% stock solution of Dharma Acid Dye's Royal Purple. This is a color that I mixed recently. It does have a tendency for some of those pinks to crash out. So of all the colors I have, this is one that you definitely want to shake well, because otherwise it might behave differently as you continue. Okay. I'm going to use the same proportion of dye for both. For our sock blank, I have 25 milliliters. For the 200 grams of yarn, I have 50. And I want to stir it well. This pot is a larger pot, but the volume is the same. Now, one other thing that is important to note, I like to set my glazes up cold. Cold with high acid, and then bring it up to temperature. I have found that this lets me get a glaze all over the yarn. Whenever I've tried to do glazes hot, and maybe in those situations I had too much dye in the container, if the dye bath was hot, I'd end up getting a lot of color on a small area of the yarn, and I would struggle to get coverage all over. Yeah, and as I bring over our 200 grams of the Hawthorne, I'm going to add the yarn in, quickly move it, lift, down, and then stop. And I'm now afraid that this is not going to glaze well. Oh, I'm so nervous now. Because I'm like, oh, it looks like I got good coverage. Maybe I didn't use enough acid. Because there was one point when I used way more acid than I needed, and then I tried to backtrack, and we will see. Okay, with our blank, again, we're going to go in, out, in, and let it be. And that is sort of the movement that I do to make sure that we get coverage, but without sort of bringing all the dye into the yarn. And now I'm going to take these over to the stove and start heating things up. I have regrets. The last little bit of dye I'm going to rinse out and put into their respective containers. I mumbled, I have regrets. And that is because I'm concerned that the color is going to penetrate more than I want it to. Oh dear. You know, maybe I should have used 450 milliliters of vinegar. It was just like I used it once by accident and then kept using that. And I'm like, okay, maybe I can go backwards a bit. But you know, the thing with glazing is it's a trust the process technique. Because you have it in, it looks like that there's a lot of color on the yarn. There's still so much dye all the way around. So we're gonna be patient, we're gonna wait. In my experience, it takes about 30 minutes for this volume of water to hit like about a boil. And then I like to heat once we're at temp for 30 minutes. So when I'm doing a glaze like this starting cold, I tend to set a timer for 60 minutes and then come back and wait and think. But every time I glaze, I'm like, oh no, it didn't work. And then it worked. So if I fail, hey, then we have some really pretty tonal yarns and probably still some reverse speckles. So let's just be patient. Yes, Rebecca, patience, patience. Why am I doing this if I know I'm gonna have two different types of yarn in the end? I really wanted to show the difference between dyeing yarn and getting a glaze layer on it on just a regular skein of yarn versus the blank. Because what if you want to make a glazed gradient? Sock blanks are really fantastic tools for dyeing gradient yarns. But when you go ahead and do the glaze, it's not going to be even throughout the whole yarn. And so potentially what you might want to do, if you want an even glaze over a gradient yarn, dye your sock blank in a gradient, unravel it, I'd wait till it's dry, but unravel the yarn, and then glaze over on top of that. And that would give you the more even glaze over the gradient. But again, the reason for doing this is just a demonstration, so that way you can make the choices of what you want to do with your own yarn dyeing. I see glazing. And it's every glazing video. I'm like, oh no, it didn't work. And then it comes to the end, I'm like, oh hey, it worked. Ooh. Oh, I see it. I don't know if it's gonna be too steamy or if you can appreciate some of that shallow coverage. Ooh, it's so pretty. Oh, got to zoom you back out, but we got very steamy. Now, picking a color for glazing can be as simple as looking for colors that strike really, really quickly to your yarn. Go over here to our yarn, letting things cool off a little bit before I pick it up. Yes, I see our glaze. It's not the most dramatic one I've ever had, but it is there and I'm happy to see it. You'll get a better view of it once things cool off. But we definitely got, where's the zip tie? I feel like we got a better glaze on the sock blank, maybe? At least that is my first impression of everything. Okay. We're still very steamy, but on the blank you can really see how it feels like brushed a little bit. And you can see a little bit from far away on the yarn as well. We definitely don't necessarily have a white underneath. It's more of like a lavender, but that is fine. I'm gonna set this aside to cool completely so we can go ahead and wash it. I would say that there is some glaze here. It's just pretty darn subtle right now. I've definitely, with this color, had it feel more glazed. And that includes what I'm seeing here on the yarn. I don't know if the camera's picking it up well, but I think what we're gonna see inside this section, see those reverse speckles that are in there? So that'll show some of the coloration difference. More acid probably would have helped, but I'm really not expecting any color bleeding or anything as I add in some dish soap. Sometimes it helps like dislodge excess dye. I don't know how necessary using soap is, but it's just a habit. And also, I suppose using soap also started back when I was dyeing a lot with food coloring because I wanted to show that it was wash fast. You know, this one almost looks like I have some navy in here. Maybe it's just a shadow because as I pull it up, that disappears. Or because I'm seeing the layer underneath it through it. But anyway, I'm very glad to have done this experiment. And I know that this was a follow-up from another project and I decided I wanted to do this before the other one was done. You know, as you do sometimes. I think it's one of my favorite things about being ChemKnits is that when I'm filming, oh my gosh, this looks so cool. When I'm filming a video, I am also thinking about it and talking about it. And so therefore new ideas just come up all the time. But anyway, spin dryer to remove excess liquid. Then I'll hang up everything to dry so we can come back and look at the finished everything. Here is our glazed yarn and the glazed sock blank. And now, is it me, or does this look a little bit more red than that? Now, I suppose it's possible. I did pour out all of the dye at the same time, so I don't think that it's that kind of issue. I think that it's more that maybe there's some breaking in here, and that there's some bluer pigments that strike differently. I don't know. But just look at this like airbrush quality of the color on the blank. If I pull it apart, you can see we're gonna get reverse speckling. That color struck, and I mean a lot of reverse speckling happens with a lot of colors, but the color struck quickly, giving that shallow, super shallow layer of color. In fact, you know, we were in an immersion pot. There's a lot of color there. There's not as much over here. And actually with this reverse stockinette, you can feel like you see, maybe not white, but that pastel behind. Having yarn twisted or knit really does help that shine. And I'll pop up some pictures of the video that inspired me to do this with a single color. And we definitely saw glaze there in both our yarn and the sock blank, but I wanted to see it here over white as well. The yarn under tension, you can see it a bit. Like a glaze is patchy, but patchy in a good way. And we have like a lavender underneath, but it really is shallow overall. And the definition that you can see around some of these strands, and if you rotate them, you can see more color on one side than the other. That's just how you know it is so shallow, which isn't necessarily an easy feat for fingering weight yarn. You know, pulling this back, I feel like we have some breaking, like this feels pinker than that right there. And I think that's showing up on camera as well. Now, I do want to go ahead and unravel the blank. And I can go ahead and do it with my automated skein winder because we don't really have a gradient here. Sure, there could be some asymmetry in the way things work up, but ultimately, this is a tonal blank dyed one way, and part of the result that we're going to get is this reverse speckly kind of yarn. I suppose I won't twist up this yarn until I have the other yarn unraveled to show the difference of the preparation of just a skein versus a blank and how that yarn looks with things that are otherwise dyed the exact same way. I suppose we could have decreased the volume of water by half for the blank, and maybe that would have been a little more similar since we did 100 grams versus 200. But anyway, you don't have to use blanks just for gradients, even though they're wonderful for that. Before I go and unravel our glazed blank, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Cindy. Cindy, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. And if you at home would like to learn more about how to become a last-minute lab partner like Cindy, go and check out the listing in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. You'll see a list of videos that I've already been working on, that I've already started filming but have not yet edited, and you can choose one to help bump it up the queue so that way I edit and release the video sooner. And then of course I'll film some shout outs for you along the way. If you have any questions about the listing, feel free to reach out to me on Etsy. But anyway, Cindy, thank you again for being my lab partner today. For simplicity's sake, I left these skeins twisted because you'll see they're very crimped. But if I manually pull it so it's straight like the other yarn, now you can really see the reverse speckling glazed versus the full skeins. Pulling it again. The glaze is still present very much on both, but when it was in the blank, you see that modeling and reverse speckling really shine and take a hold. And so not only is this a great example of glazing, but a great example of dyeing a blank versus a skein. Now I will go ahead and relax this crimp. I'm going to soak the yarn and sort of snap it like so with my hands inside, and that'll help relax this crimp, and then twist it back up. But I'm going to go ahead and twist it now just so we can have some conclusions. Now, one technique that I've loved to do that really is more of an airbrushing is to use like color mist sprays on one side of the blank and then a different color on the other side. This not only gives you reverse speckling, but you can get alternating speckles of color between like a rainbow and a black, which is just absolutely insane. I'll try to include a picture of that. But that's much harder to do with acid dyes. And I suppose you could find a way to airbrush that. I would just want to have a different type of studio, not in my kitchen, because the likelihood of overspraying is much greater. And you would really want a super fine mist of some kind, which I have used a Misto spray bottle, but it really just is not very easy to like pressurize and use, and I think is worthwhile for like once in a while, but not for everything. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I post at least twice a week, and you don't want to miss any of it. Thank you so much for watching.